I'm Duncan McLeod, and this is TechCentral's TCS Plus. Subscribe on YouTube at youtube.com/TechCentral and get our daily newsletter in your inbox every morning. It goes out around 5 a.m. You can get that at techcentral.co.za/newsletter. Now, I'm very pleased to welcome Dr. Christoph Nieuwoudt to TechCentral now. Christoph is FNB's FNB, First Rank Group, I beg your pardons, Chief Data and Analytics Officer and an expert in the field of artificial intelligence. Christoph, welcome to you. Thanks so much for joining us on TechCentral.
Thanks for the invite, Duncan.
Thank you. I'd like to talk a bit about your career history and your education, in fact, because there's an interesting backstory here, Christoph. You studied in the field of artificial intelligence, specifically machine learning, I believe. You have a PhD in the subject. Through which institution? UP? University of Pretoria?
University of Pretoria, that's right.
Mm-hmm. Tell us a bit about why you ended up on that career path and why you studied in that field.
Well, it's a long story, so I'll try and keep it very short. But I mean, I've always wanted to be a computer engineer as a kid, growing up, programming, studied electronic engineering, did honors. I wanted to study in the US because that's really where things are happening.
Okay.
So I studied at North Carolina State, did a master's. Came back because my girlfriend was here, and then I joined the university, and joining the university you have to do a PhD. So that's really how it works.
Okay.
But I think it was really the early days of artificial intelligence. So it was, voice and image processing.
When was this, the 1990s?
1990s.
Mm-hmm.
And really, it was artificial neural networks were really coming to the fore. Now, after that, the field has really evolved since. But we'll talk a bit about that later.
Yeah. Sure. So, I mean, you like many other kids who are interested in computers, you were saying before we started recording that your first computer was a ZX81, as was mine. It was a great little product for its time. But moving into artificial intelligence and machine learning, that's a very specific discipline. How did your fascination with computers progress into the field of AI?
Well, I think people have really seen a vision for how computers can change the world. And I guess I've seen that as a child, just the kind of things that you could do that your parents couldn't do. And that, when you start working, if you're able to program and use computers, it really is, it gives you a significant advantage in life and even in business. Mm-hmm. Because of the advent of the amount of computing power times the amount of data that is available, multiplied by the algorithmic improvements that have been made, mm-hmm. have really, transitioned society from being dependent on only human intelligence to being able to rely to a large extent on machine intelligence for a lot of tasks.
For sure. Now, you did your PhD on the subject. Tell us a little bit about your thesis and why you focused on the particular subject you did.
Well, I was really working on image and speech processing. So specific work that I worked on was for PhD was really on speech, and it was really about creating language models or acoustic models for new languages. So we had multi-language libraries, and we said if you seed a model with a very large corpus, you can create a speaker-independent mm-hmm. corpus, and then we can adapt it like we would adapt to a given speaker. It can adapt to a new language, and by adjusting the acoustic parameters, of the phonetic models mm-hmm. in hidden Markov models. We could basically train it to accelerate development of speech recognition in new languages.
Amazing. Were computers powerful enough back then to put this into practice?
That's a very good point. So a lot of the methods I coded everything myself and another PhD student. Okay. We wrote our own libraries to do this, and we wrote it in C++ because that's really what was available. We also used libraries like P4, so portable programs for parallel processors, mm-hmm. To actually distribute this across the university's computers. So at one stage, I was using probably the bulk of the computing power available at UP. We convinced them to put Linux machines in the labs instead of Microsoft so that we can run in the background while everyone else was working. We just had to tone down the jobs during daytime so mm-hmm. that people working in the labs didn't get bothered. And you had to write all kinds of use all kinds of techniques to make sure the answers actually got back reliably, etc. You would program this stuff in sockets, etc. which is kind of a lot of the underlying technology for the internet.
Yes.
At the same time, the guy next to me was basically doing the routers for UNet, which was the internet in South Africa at that point.
Good grief.
And we'd have our coffee discussions around what is the capacity of the internet in South Africa and should we up it, etc. Because we were running the internet.
Yes.
So one day it got commercialized, and we were like, who are these people that are running the internet now? Because yesterday we were still running it.
Oh. So were you familiar with all those guys from Rhodes University at the time who were involved in doing some of the commercialization work of the early internet?
So we were actually not as much in the commercialization, but Rhodes was obviously part of
the same network.
Of the same network, and we had the international links, and the universities were funding it, because that's really where, I guess, DARPANET started. Started the internet in the US, and linking with the US. So even when I was in the US in '93, I mean, myself and my girlfriend, we were always talking. We were using Talk to chat, because it was much cheaper than calling.
Yeah. And this was before the World Wide Web.
That was long before the World Wide Web. Before WhatsApp now is pretty common, but if you think about it, we're the equivalent of WhatsApp, 30 years ago.
Yeah. Amazing stuff. And computer processing power has accelerated many times over in that time.
Significantly, absolutely.
The work that you were doing in the labs back then, I imagine you can do on modern computers in a matter of minutes rather than 24 hours, for example. It's just advanced to that extent. Is a lot of what we're seeing around AI now, and a lot of the excitement around it and some of the applications that we're seeing emerging, simply because computers have advanced to the point where it becomes practical to do some of this stuff? So
I think it's the three things that I mentioned. So I think the amount of computing power has improved dramatically. Even the architectures that are applied nowadays, the traditional von Neumann machines, people spend a lot of work on computer architecture to make them faster for traditional applications. But now you would see, like NVIDIA, obviously being able to run things in parallel, and actually even lower bit. You don't need 64 bits for more simple artificial neural networks, but you have got lots of neurons, and you need to be able to run algorithms that do basically matrix multiplication at a very big scale. And the architectures have also evolved to be able to run these algorithms, and that's why NVIDIA is now one of the hottest stocks in the market, because they are really good at doing these chips. Because at some point you will hit Moore's law. But the architectural improvements have advanced that. But that's just the one factor. The second one is the data. It is really about data in the field, even if it's AI. If you don't have good data, there's not much that you can do just with the algorithms itself. And then the third one is really algorithmic advances have been massive. So we were still using, let's say, traditional neural networks as a feature classifier, together with maybe a hidden Markov model or some other model to model sequencing of words, etc.
Okay.
Whereas deep learning really revolutionized how you can train neural networks. That happened in the 2010s. And now, since 2017, with the publication by Google of the transformer neural network architectures, have again now completely opened up the door for generative AI in a major way. And so there's actually been a couple of algorithmic evolutions that have been as important as the amount of computing power and or the data.
I can't actually think of anyone better in this country than you to ask where this is going, but we're going to get to that a little bit later in the discussion. I want you to put on your prognostication hat and maybe have a look at where we're likely to be 10 years from now. But let's stick with the current. I actually want to let's go back a little bit in history, because I want to spend a little bit more time on your past, because there's some really interesting stuff here. You at the University of Pretoria were involved in co-designing a new computer engineering degree at the University of Pretoria. Tell me a bit about that.
Well, absolutely. I'll tell you what, any engineering student can tell you that there's some subjects that people hate, like drafting, some of the more mechanical engineering things, even electric machines, etc. So when we did the electronic engineering degree back then, it really incorporated, you had your light current and your heavy current mix. And like I said before, actually the light current is not about the amount of current, it's actually about information engineering. And we said, I just came back from the US, completed a master's there, and we had some discussions, and Professor Leuschner, who's unfortunately passed away by now, he was the head of the department there. And he said, why don't we create a new degree that actually will be much better suited to this. And we basically, myself and another guy, Dr. Jan Holm, we put together the syllabus. We were tasked to do that. So that was really the first then computer engineering degree in the country.
Okay.
And it's obviously EXA registered. It really incorporates computer science together with electronic engineering.
Okay.
So it retains a lot of the fundamentals of electronic engineering. So, but it obviously will have computer engineering. It has network engineering.
Sure.
It's got telecommunications, signal processing, control systems.
Right.
So all the really strong fundamental subjects, but you are learning to program as well. So you understand really not just coding, software engineering, database constructs, etc., which then is really, and that's really what the market is looking for. If I'm hiring people now, that is really the kind of skills that the market is looking for. And even more data engineering, I guess, is like what Stellenbosch have now recently launched a degree that kind of just takes it to the next level in terms of what the market needs.
Interesting. So you joined FirstRand in 2004, almost 20 years ago now, I think working in the West Bank division.
That's right.
In 2007, you became head of credit, and in 2010, FNB's chief risk officer. And FirstRand's head of retail credit at the time, I think. And then in 2016, you became CEO of FNB's consumer division. And 4 years later, you were appointed to this newly created role of chief data and analytics officer. I'm guessing you helped design that role.
Yes, that is exactly right. So I spoke to our group's CEO, and he said, put forward a proposal. He likes the idea, but put forward, the proposal, bring it to Stratco, and we'll take it from there. So, so we actually now have more than 20 CDAOs in FirstRand Group.
Okay.
So we really see it as a strategic role. So traditionally, let's say 10 years ago, people would have, most companies would have had a head of business intelligence. Then a lot of companies started seeing, well, this is more important than that. We should have a chief data officer. Mm-hmm. But actually, what we're saying with the chief data analytics officer is the bigger part of the value add that you're driving is actually through decisioning, which really requires analytics and or AI in many cases. And that actually is quite a strategic role. So if you think about what the CEO of a Google or a Meta or these firms are, they are really driving technology. That is at the heart of their business model. It's obviously understanding consumer need and meeting consumer needs, but with a deep understanding of the technology. And what we're saying is that even in financial services, it is actually quite critical to be able to understand what the technology can do for you, and that therefore it becomes of strategic importance.
Financial services institutions are becoming more like technology companies, aren't they?
Absolutely. All of the other financial services where I deal with now, they've also appointed CDAOs, or they are in the process of appointing them. So, and yes, I think the technology focus has been there for at least a decade, if not 15 years. So people have understood. I mean, in FNB was obviously the first to launch cell phone banking, to launch an app. And really has, I think we're very proud of what we have done in the digital space. This is really about putting the intelligence behind it so that it's not just a button that you can click on, but it is actually, it is doing something smart, that is keeping you safer, that it is giving you credit, that is automated, 24/7, that even insurance can use intelligence so that it's contextual. That's really, I guess, what we're trying to do with this.
Well, take me through your role. Take me through the role of a chief data and analytics officer and what 80% of your work involves. What are you doing on a day-to-day basis?
Okay, I guess that's a great point. So my job at my level is quite strategic. As I said, we have got quite a number of CDAOs that are sitting at the different segments. So that would be in a FNB and a West Bank, we call that retail and commercial, and a corporate and institutional, which is really RMB. Then we have transact, lend, invest, insure, which are the pillars. Those are the main activities that we do in the bank. Then there's interactions, like we have 2 billion interactions a month streaming from our platform. We've got customer, which is obviously very important, and then we got the functional areas. So what my job is really is to understand what is the value drivers across all of these. So that's what we work towards. So we have financial monetization targets. Adding R1 billion of PBT per annum is really my financial target, that we're running across the group. So that's $1 million incremental over and above what you added last year. last
billion a year.
earned $1 billion a year, yes.
No pressure.
No pressure. So that's really, I guess, and that really is, you have to create value for customers. That's the only way that you can really be able to monetize this. To get that, you obviously have to build data products on platform that is capturing all of this data in a smart way that can be accessed, and models that are automating decisions, because this value is not created by creating management information. We don't count that. If we create management information, then management create the value. But if we are deploying models that can really automate this, result in better take-up rates for products that can automate and be smarter at credit. Like we have a R1 trillion lending book plus in the bank. So even small improvements on credit is a huge lever for a financial institution. But it's really across a range of things, including some level of automation.
Yeah.
And then that sounds all very sexy, but to get that, you obviously have to have the data on the platform. So I've talked a bit in reverse now, but that was initially a big focus of this. Was we have built, I guess, quite a powerful information architecture that we have been making sure that we're getting. We have probably about 800 source systems in the group. And we've now got more than 95% of what we define as key data on a central or a single unified platform. It's not just in one place. It's on-prem and in cloud. But really, I guess that's really the journey. So those are the things that we're busy with. And obviously, the ethics and the government and governance, etc., are very important parts of being able to do this in a trusted way that delivers against customer expectations, meets regulatory needs, etc.
We're going to talk about the ethics of AI in a bit, but let's start with brass tacks on AI. Why is it important to the First Rand Group, and what's it going to allow you to do?
So AI is becoming increasingly important, and what I always say, we a lot of what we do does not really require AI. So, for example, on the scoring side, etc., a lot of those models are could be logistic regressions.
Sure.
So that is really the bread and butter, or GLM models in the insurance side, etc. But a lot of the time you can create better features that allow better decisioning. So part of that, feeding into that, if you want to do complex, behavioral hypersegmentation, then traditional techniques don't really cater as well for that. On the fraud and money laundering side has been obviously an area where we've pioneered and led with the use of AI-type models. Just because the problems, it's more complex, it's more interrelationships. It's not just the customer, but who else the customer is interacting with and paying and receiving funds from, doing network analysis, etc. So that really has lent itself to the application of using more advanced models. And ironically, the sign-off requirements are not as strict. So we have a financial crimes technical committee. Okay, you can imagine we have lots of committees in the back.
Sure.
But that signs off on pretty complex models that are used to uncover financial crime, fraud, risk, etc.
Yeah.
That would be very difficult to get through a prudential authority if we applied them, for example, for capital, or to get sign-off from auditors for IFRS 9 or IFRS 17. So that's banking or insurance provisioning. Those models, ironically, are much more simple and primitive is maybe not the greatest word, but the innovation on that side is significantly less than where you are. Sometimes you innovate where you are allowed to innovate, and obviously where you need more complex models to be able to solve problems.
Sure. So where are you applying AI techniques right now to good use? You've mentioned fraud and money laundering. Is that
okay? No, that was the starting point. So I think a big focus really is on this hyper personalization of contextual offers for customers. So that is a complex topic because it needs to take into account the customer's needs, and in terms, we also have to assess the customer's, financial wellness, etc., in terms of positioning products, and you have to look at short-term and long-term outcomes. So, because it's no use you showing a product the customer's not going to buy. It would be great if everybody bought a house and we want to finance, but that is something that happens really in a narrow context. At the same time, we got to address the whole set of needs from spending less and you earn on the transact side, optimizing spending behavior, etc. We've got great tools for that. I think we're trying to put more of the AI power behind that. And then obviously, like I said, the pillars are quite a big construct for us. So the transact, lend, invest, insure.
Okay.
All of them have got their own modeling teams, etc. And we try to put together a unified view for customers. So that's quite a big focus. I think automation of activities is another one that is quite big. And there's a lot of mundane work that people really hate doing. That you can automate and just make it, make your staff more efficient and more productive.
Yeah. So how do you measure successful outcomes here? I mean, you mentioned the 1 billion rand PBT per year, but I presume there are other metrics you use to measure success in this area.
Yes.
What are some of those metrics?
So I think the important thing about a strategy, and if it's any strategy, is it has to align with what the business objectives are.
Yeah.
So if we are helping the business deliver against the business's objectives, then we're doing a good job. So typically, what we've got a number of objectives for, I guess we've got a couple of C's as a big strategy for us. So more customers, more to customers. So that's basically cross-sell. We're optimizing, I mentioned before, for example, credit and capital as part of that. Cost efficiency would be another one. So all of these measures come into it. And then obviously the other measures, these are probably more outcome measures. The other measures in terms of customer satisfaction, etc., are the same ones that business use. Because it's no use we have a different way of measuring output than business.
Yeah,
so it is really about not having a separate strategy for it. But really, it
has to be integrated with everything you do.
Exactly. It has to be integrated with what the business wants to achieve. And that is really, I guess, what makes it powerful.
Yeah. So I guess in your role, you need to interface with every area of the business and understand what the drivers are in those parts of the business, what the people working in those areas actually need, and how they can become more efficient and use these tools to...
Duncan, I guess that's a great point. What we found actually is that the bulk of our CDIOs were in business leadership positions as well. So in terms of, quite a number of our segment CDIOs and even some of the pillars were CEOs of business units in other areas. So
because you need to understand the business concerns.
You need to understand business, exactly. So there are important technology considerations, but that's really what we do on the platform side. So there's quite a lot of specialized skills that you need that relate to a data analytics platform, creating it, the information architecture, the modeling of data, and the data engineering and all of that. But really, to make this strategic, it has to impact business.
Yes.
Otherwise, it is something on the side. And people will say, well, look here, it's nice. Look at this BI dashboards that we have, but they won't be able to attribute any value to it. So what I've found, and even internationally, when I took this job, 2 years ago, I'd go to Gartner conference. Okay, they were virtual because it was COVID period. And the amazing thing to me was that the CDIO equivalents, in overseas banks, they didn't have monetization targets. Wow. They were all debating, measuring the value of data and whatever. And I said, but don't you have targets that you have to deliver against? What is your performance metrics? And they were not. It does seem that I think that this is still an evolving field, even globally. And I tell you, even in South Africa, if you ask other CDOs what is their monetization targets, they might not have a number.
Where does this role typically fit inside an organization? Does a chief data officer, whatever the role is called, typically report to the CIO, to the CEO?
That is a great question. In our case as well, I guess if you think about our group, is highly federated. So I report to Jacques Sillier, not to Alan. So I'm not. I guess the role is not a Stratco level yet in my case, but it is at least. Jacques is running, let's say, 60% of group profit. So that is.
He's the CEO of FNB.
So he's the CEO.
And Alan Pullinge is the CEO of First Rand.
First Rand, yes, exactly. So Jacques is and it's retail and commercial. So that includes Westbank and it includes Direct Access and a number of other brands that are sitting in retail and commercial, and of course the broader Africa impact of that. But I guess that's been, luckily I've been in group for long enough and been in different places. So that probably actually is quite a success factor as well.
Yes.
So these jobs are, it has become, I think picking the right person with some knowledge in the group has been, we've also grown our own caliber very well. So we've not really hired executives in this area from outside for a long time, because we've had such a good feeder of graduates coming from universities that have got the analytical background.
That's good to hear.
And that really, we've got a community of 1,900 now in data analytics, full-time employees.
Just to allied to that question, and there'll be lots of companies, not just in financial services, but across the board, watching this, listening to this discussion, and they'll probably be at an earlier stage of their thinking around AI. If they're looking at a project like this, is it something that should be deployed by the IT department, or is it something that should happen elsewhere in the business, in your view and your experience?
Yeah, so I do think that it needs a separate focus. So even our CIO for our data analytics platform is a separate skill set. The kind of people that we have here, because if you think about it, you're not running an operational line of business system.
Yeah.
You're basically, we built a data analytics platform. So the reservoir, the big data platform, the compute parts of that, the enterprise data warehouse, the integration fabric, the data APIs, all of those components, those are all the IT jobs in our area.
Yes.
And if you think about them, they're actually quite different from what even a traditional, CIO job would be.
Yeah.
So it requires its own technology focus, but that is really just the platform. To deliver the value and to embed analytics and to create a data-driven culture really has to happen at an exco level in each of the different business units and segments and areas in the bank. And look, at the maturity varies widely, even in our own group.
Sure.
And that's natural. Some areas, naturally, in retail, you had to have scoring in place, even a decade ago.
Yeah.
If you didn't have scoring, you would be nowhere, right? So those areas naturally have progressed and have become quite advanced, even into the commercial side, and then the retail and commercial bank, therefore, overall quite mature. Corporate and institutional has got pockets of excellence. If you run a markets business, you've got algo trading and you've got lots of, quite complex areas, but these areas are typically quite siloed.
Yeah.
So putting together an aggregate view across, a corporate wholesale bank is quite harder. But
one size doesn't fit all. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Let's talk a bit about generative AI, because that's been the hot button topic for the last 6 months, ever since ChatGPT was released into the world by OpenAI. Tell me a bit about how First Rand has experimented with generative AI, models like ChatGPT
Yes.
and others, other large language models, as they're called. And what impact do you see generative AI having on productivity in the bank?
Okay, that's a great point. And okay, firstly, let me say I think generative AI is going to be a game changer. So, like I said, we've had early, artificial neural networks, we had deep learning, and now more recently we had reinforcement learning and generative AI, which are really they're changing the game. I guess even Goldman Sachs have formed the view like what China did for manufacturing in the previous 3 decades was to lower global inflation by about a percentage point a year. And they're saying generative AI, but generative AI is a big part of that, has the potential to lower inflation by more than a percentage point for the next decade. And if you ask me, a lot of the pickup in the global markets, and you would have seen that in the tech stocks, have gone crazy again.
Yeah. Despite interest rates being
despite everything else,
yeah.
This has been the one area of the economy and of the global economy where there is significant productivity improvements and improvements in education, healthcare across all sectors that are now possible. Because I guess the beauty of this is before. When I worked 30 years ago, when I worked on artificial intelligence or machine learning, it was on very narrow focused areas. So something that you did in one area was not really transportable. If I used, let's say, recurrent neural networks or artificial neural networks with hidden Markov models for speech, it really was applied to speech. Now, the models, we've actually unleashed this transformer neural network technology on knowledge itself. And that's quite a big thing to understand. So people think, well, it's just sentence completion. This thing does sentence completion. It's much more than that. I mean, we have basically put the human corpus, or a very big part, of the human corpus is now downloadable into something that's a couple of gigs big. And it's not just sitting in OpenAI or with Google or with Meta. It's actually become kind of public domain. It's open sourced, these LLM models.
You can actually buy these NVIDIA chips if you can find them because they're in short supply, and you can put them in your server room.
And the truth is, you don't actually need the NVIDIA chips. You don't need to train the LLMs. They're already trained for you.
Right.
And they're already at a level that is so advanced, they don't need to be much more advanced to understand English. And not just English. Where they understand, biochemistry. They understand, you can ask them questions on nuclear physics, and you'll be amazed at what they know. So
no, in inverted commas.
What they know. Okay, they don't know the answers, but they know the relationships between the concepts. It's not just word completion. They of course, I think there are major obvious shortcomings in the first generation of these, which everybody has been, poking into. Of course, these models I think first, let's say the privacy and the intellectual protection concerns of the public versions of these, that's quite clear.
The one that scrapes stuff from the internet.
If you put your stuff in there, you are basically making it public. Okay, so clearly, you have to address that, and you address that by using a private version of this. So use your own instance that is hosted by your favorite cloud provider that you can access, and that does not feed any information back into OpenAI
I was going to ask about
or
that,
to anyone else. Yeah. Okay. Then I guess the next big concern is people say the models hallucinate. Of course, they hallucinate. They are basically, they don't know the details of your company. Your company's detail, the answers, perhaps because you also haven't published all your own information that it could read it. And frankly, even if it was there, it would be such a smidgen of information in the wider. It is generalizing the concepts.
But these things that it gets wrong, is this because it found wrong information on the internet, or is it actually making stuff up?
Well, it's both. It is both.
Yeah.
Some cases we find that it gives a wrong answer, but then there was actually wrong information published. But in general, it does make things up. Of course it does. It generalizes. So like the human brain, it is using a lot of information, and it is basically interpolating between a number of data points that it has around knowledge. And sometimes it is actually telling you how things maybe should work. Actually, when you ask it about features on our app, we'll tell you, you click that and you click that, and then it solves the problem. And we're like, that would be brilliant if we did that, but we haven't done that yet. So what you have to do is you have to have your own corpus, and you have to, you don't have to retrain the LLM. Okay, because that is a lot of work. That people say, do we need to retrain the LLM for your own topic? And the feedback we're getting is even highly specialized firms it knows enough about biochemistry, or like I said, nuclear physics, that you could use it in those areas. It doesn't necessarily know the answers, though. It can understand the question. So that is where you have to pair that with your own answer that is specific to your company, maybe even to a specific customer, about what is the answer that we should give this customer.
You train it.
In that context. You have to train it. Now, the most simple way of doing that is what they call prompt engineering. You would just put text in there, and it can use that text to generate an answer. A more sophisticated way is to embed your information into, to basically vectorize the text of your corpus into, and we call that embedding. And that allows it to access your information, and then you could even constrain it so that it will not give an answer if you do not have an answer. So it will not hallucinate. So those are the mechanisms. Look, this stuff is not public released yet, but this is what I guess everybody is working on. It is just what is. And then I guess the next evolution is agents. So you are basically, people say, well, it gave you a wrong answer to write a piece of code. And we say, okay, but did you give it a chance to run the code and test the output against what you asked it to do, etc.? No. So that's where then I guess agents are next, and these things have been coming out in the last couple of months. So libraries like LangChain give you the ability to really to write agents that will just do it smarter. It won't ask it just once.
Yes.
It will prime it properly. It will get an answer. It will test the answer. If the answer is not right, it gets a chance to correct it, and it will give you then, let's say, a better answer. And I guess that is really. So think about this, the level of sophistication of the answers that you're going to get from these models.
Yeah.
I don't know if you use GTP4.
I have on Bing, yes.
Okay. On Bing, okay. On Bing, I have to admit, is really poor because it is rephrasing your question as a search.
Right.
You have to unfortunately pay the $20 a month, get access to GTP4.
Okay.
And I must say, it does inference in questions. You can ask it logical reasoning questions where it can actually give you a decent answer. The maths and the statistics is almost first year level. It's pretty
first year level.
Yes.
Okay.
I think so. I mean, that's not a professional opinion. I didn't benchmark it. But that's kind of my experience. I mean, in the tests, obviously, the entry for university exams, it aces those now.
Yeah.
So those are...
How quickly is this technology going to advance?
It is going to advance very rapidly. I think the language understanding is already mature. It probably doesn't need to advance that much. The generating of an intelligent answer in reply to the question using the right context, etc., that's where firms are going to spend a lot of effort to make sure that it can actually give you the right relevant answer in the context that you are asking at. So yes, I think for different fields, it will advance very rapidly. We speak to law firms. This is going to be a big thing. One law firm told me that in their experience now, the model can draft as well as a junior associate, the new associate. The point, though, is it's not going to stop there. It will get better. I mean, will it ever be as good as a more expert person? Probably that might take a very long time. I guess so. People get afraid. What is going to happen? What's going to happen to jobs? And I think the point, what I always say is that your job will not be taken by AI, but someone else using AI may be so productive that they are out competing you. And that's why I do think that using technology, if you look at the US and China, they are the most technology advanced countries in the world. They've got the lowest unemployment. So unfortunately, unfortunately, I think it's a great opportunity to use, but it's also a threat if a country or a company or a person, remains oblivious of the technology. Yes, it will have a societal impact.
Yeah. Is there a risk, though, that at some point companies are going to become too reliant on this technology? I'm thinking of call centers, for example. I already, as a consumer, get frustrated interacting with call centers because the companies involved to reduce costs make it very difficult to speak to a human being, and they always try to keep you on the IVR system and try to solve your problems automatically, and you don't get to speak to a human being. And I know why companies do that, because there's a very high cost associated with staffing all of those call centers. But do you think there's a risk that consumers are going to get frustrated if companies suddenly say, wow, this is a fantastic idea, we can get rid of all our call center agents and we can have computers answering, AIs answering people's
that would be a risk. Look, at some digital-only companies, you never had an option of talking to people anyway.
That is true.
I mean, try to speak to somebody at Apple.
No, you can't.
Uber, Airbnb, etc. Unless you have fraud. If you have fraud, you probably get to email somebody. But otherwise, there's nobody to talk to. Okay. So I guess that said, yes, I think companies have to be very responsible in how you take up the technology, but it certainly has huge potential to improve customer experience. So if you think about the way that it, like I said, can it understand what the customer is asking? Absolutely.
Yes.
Will it even know if it doesn't quite know what you're asking? So that it can ask, so that we can prompt it to ask a follow-up question. Absolutely. Even our existing models can do that. So we have been using, you did ask before, about generative AI. We have been using generative AI for more than half a decade. With a very specialized application. So reports that our let's say suspicious transaction reporting, enhanced due diligence report that we provide to the FIC. They are written with generative AI, but with human supervision then.
Yes.
Humans look at it and may modify, etc., because they have to comb through dozens or more of systems and data to get to an answer, which they are really efficient at. I think in call centers, the potential for actually answering customers' questions better. I think the trick for us is really how do we embed our local information? Because if you currently ask GTP4 even about what you want to know from the bank, it's not going to give you the answer that you need.
Yes.
So doing that is still a big thing, and then putting the human in the loop, helping like our advisors, transitioning much more of our staff to offer integrated customer advice. That is a very big strategy for us.
So it's about making your people more productive rather than replacing your people.
Yes,
Yeah.
that is right.
Yeah.
I think that's absolutely right. As a group, we have been, growing for the longest period, in terms of staff numbers. And it is really about making sure that if your staff are productive, you can afford them because they're creating value. I think the counterpoint is for companies that are not productive. The company would not be able to afford, because the value of labor will be less than the cost of labor. And I really think that is the economic principle that is important with technology. When people think technology will take away jobs, they are actually missing the most fundamental economic concept, and that is that technology improves the value of labor because it improves the output.
Yes.
And that is why it actually allows you to create these jobs. And yes, these are then more value-adding jobs because and you don't need a PhD in AI to use these. That is the beauty of the generative technology. It actually can work in English.
Yes.
So that is where we think it actually can help all staff, not just like in contact centers, etc.
Let's talk a bit about cloud applications versus on-premises, because I think this is an important discussion around this topic. We've seen there have been a couple of examples where sensitive corporate information has leaked through GPT, and we've seen companies like Apple, for example, saying to staff, you may not use these platforms because they're concerned that they're proprietary, and Apple's a highly secretive company.
Yes.
They're worried that information about products they're developing, for example, could leak through these systems. So they've said, no, you do not use any third-party large language models if you work for Apple. I'm interested that FNB is doing a lot of its development through cloud service providers rather than building infrastructure on premises in your own data center. Are there risks associated with that? I know you said you work very closely to cordon off this data and you don't allow it to be shared generally, but what are some of the rules you need to put in place to ensure that there isn't a risk associated with using a third-party cloud service provider in doing this kind of work?
Absolutely. Look, I think at the outset, probably, most firms in the world have got lots more data in the cloud than they maybe are recognizing. Okay. So if you're using a Microsoft stack, then you probably are hosting that in Azure.
Yeah.
Okay, so a lot of your data will already be there. So you have to be quite confident that Microsoft Azure is going to keep all your emails and your team recordings and your SharePoints and everything else safe. You obviously are ultimately still responsible for that. Your access controls, everything else has to be really good, dual factor authentication, etc. But the tools are there. Okay. Yeah. So that said, we still run very big data centers because it is actually cost effective to run the scale of operations that we have on-prem. But a lot of the computational loads, etc., if you are doing end-of-day calculations or you're doing month-end runs, etc., a lot of that is variable load. And the running those computational jobs in the cloud is just a lot more efficiency. But in the same way that you have to protect your emails and your staff environment, you need to have the same level of controls. And whether you're using Azure or you're using Amazon Web Services, at least both have got significant hosting in South Africa.
Yes.
So it's even in the national interest. The data is not even leaving the country and it's managed here. Obviously, that doesn't mean it's unsafe to use other jurisdictions. I think in European data privacy laws are also very strict. So you probably can place some reliance on that. You obviously have to make sure that you have got the environments set up right.
Yes.
So the points around using ChatGPT, yes, on our own bank devices, at the moment still ChatGPT is disabled.
Oh.
You can't go onto OpenAI.com.
Okay.
So we say stuff you can use it, but you're going to using it on your own device, or if you are part of the group that is working on our own instance, yes, then you have a separate login, and that is obviously hosted in the cloud. But that is a private ring-fenced environment, and that will have to have the same level of security. And like I said before, that will address the PI and the IP issues as well.
Let's talk about AI skills now, because you have embarked on a reskilling project within the FirstRand stable. Tell us a bit about that project, which staff, which employees are involved, And how difficult it is to run a project like this in an area where I imagine skills are in high demand?
Yeah, so I think let's start with the wider staff. So Mark Nasilla that you had here before, he's been pioneering a very big data literacy and now AI literacy program across the group, which anyone can attend, and the meetings are recorded. So basically, any staff member in the group that wants to understand what is the latest development, how this will impact you, what are the ethical implications, and how do you formulate business cases, what kind of applications or use cases are good, etc. That is a very big general awareness topic, so that we get people also excited about using it. Now, then obviously we have got different needs in the data analytics community itself. I must say that we still have a variety of training needs. It's not just AI. So we, for example, have a data engineering academy, because that was one of the biggest areas of shortages, not the analytical people, because we have a lot of them. Not that we don't like more good analytical people, but data engineering, we have an academy. We have an information architecture academy. We have got academy for data modeling. And then we've got a whole host of other specialized skills. So all of these, actually, we are still on an ongoing basis training up people. Then there is, let's say, tool-specific training that we're doing. We have now, recently launched a generative AI training program that is every second week on generative AI. Because, like I said, I mean, actually, the irony was we have a lot of PhDs in AI in the bank. So we said, okay, so for this generative AI, so we said, who is our top generative AI expert? And we were like, with Mark Nasilla, I was having this discussion, and you've got this guy, and like. They all recently completed, like 5 years ago, their PhDs on some of them on natural language processing.
Amazing.
And I said, okay, but the Transformers paper was only published 2017, so that actually their PhDs predated. They all have to relearn how to use the new models, the new techniques, etc. And like I was saying earlier, even the thinking around the techniques and platform usages has been, every month there has been new releases in how to use it. So I do think that this is going to be, it's a very exciting period for people in the field. It's an exciting period for new people to come in, because it's not necessarily technically that challenging. Using it is not that challenging, but there is a massive amount of relearning that has to happen across the spectrum. And then once we deploy tools, let's say Microsoft Copilot or etc., to staff at scale, but the stuff is very intuitive to use. I don't think there's not much training to do when it's suggesting what the answer to an email should be.
Right.
That's like, I mean, come on, just but I think it's also creating awareness of the risks. What it means, you are still ultimately accountable if you're using a generative AI or any other technique to generate output. You are still ultimately fully accountable for that. So the human in the loop has to understand their responsibilities, because if they abdicate that, then you clearly, you have a risk that is not well managed.
Yeah, and it's a risk, I suppose, as well, if an employee decides, I'm a bit hungover today, I don't really feel like working. Let's just let the AI do all the answers to the emails, and then the AI is sending out rubbish.
Technically, that's possible. You could have an agent that completely answers your emails, and you can even put some controls on it.
Yeah.
But the point is, I guess for people to feel a little bit more comfortable, I mean, AI is nowhere near at the point where it can actually, in general, replace what a human is doing. It is really, I guess, the routine tasks. It is in the specific context, and even then we have to supply the context, etc. So it needs to be managed. It needs to be well managed.
Do you disclose that an employee has been assisted by an AI in a communication with a client? Is that an ethical consideration at all? Is that something that's
a very good point?
Because in journalism, already there's discussions going on about, if you use GPT, for example, to help you write an article, should you as the journalist disclose in that article that article was partially written by an AI?
I think that's a very good question. The point also related to that, if you're using that, GTP has assimilated all this information, which may or may not have been copyrighted by the original publisher.
Another issue, yes.
So I think in journalism, it is very, very valid and concerning. In our case, I mean, we are not trying to rewrite Shakespeare, or we are trying to answer pretty basic questions.
Yeah.
So I think that is but that's a good question. Actually, at this stage, in terms of the pilot, I don't think that it is actually saying that, but it is really using internal information. Copyright is not of an issue. I think, like I said, the privacy and the accuracy aspect is probably the bigger concern in that respect, because then
almost a disclaimer at the
copyright
bottom.
Or the disclaimer. Yeah. But the point is actually one has to be careful you put a disclaimer there, because you are still fully accountable for that answer. I don't think you can get away. I mean, so software terms of use, you would know very well, typically would say that this there is no warranty provided that the software is has any use whatsoever.
Right. Protect our base.
But the point completely. Is, if you're giving customer advice.
Yeah.
Look, if you're talking about phase, there's advice and advice as well. If you're talking phase regulated advice, now we're clearly not using it for that.
Right.
But look, that may come, but much more eventually. If you're using to generate a nudge or a tip, etc. Today we generate lots of nudges and tips that are generated off our streaming platform. Mm-hmm. That will tell you could have saved money if you did that or whatever. Does it say here? Putting a disclaimer there actually devalues the effort, because you have to stand by your communication. Mm-hmm. That's really, I guess, my main point is you cannot absolve. If people are absolving themselves by saying this was generated by AI, I think that is going to really weaken the trust in the system. If you're using the technology, you have to use it in a way that you can actually be responsible for the output.
As we come to a conclusion on this conversation, Christoph, I want to maybe look a little bit into the future. Longer term, say, and I know making predictions in technology is very, very difficult because technology changes so quickly, but let's look 10 years from now. AI has advanced in leaps and bounds in that time. How will it have changed the financial services industry? And how would I, as a customer, say, of FNB, see my bank differently because you have deployed AI so extensively in your organization?
Yeah, so I think it is going to be a revolution, but it will happen evolutionary,
okay,
if I can say. So
won't
10 years
tomorrow.
Will 10 years be very different from now? Yes. I think the bulk of what you will need to have will be available 24/7, and it will be in natural language. That is just easier to understand, and it will incorporate a significant amount of advice that will have the aim of improving the outcome for the customer. And undoubtedly. And the point is, if we are not doing it, someone else will do it. And then the intermediaries will come in, and you will be banking with the big tech then, because they will be providing it, and us banks will be commodity providers plumbing at the back end. That's the big fear. Banks. So that is why we are doing this for our own survival.
You're right.
But it is going to. I do think that the experience will be a radically improved customer experience. Will it lower the cost of financial services substantially? Absolutely. But it will lower the cost of education, of legal services. Imagine anybody can have access to expert medical advice, to expert legal advice, to expert education that is tailored for you or for your kid, for their age, for their exact needs. That is probably the future that we're looking at.
And will hold their hand along the way.
In 10 years. And will hold their hand along the way. That ultimately, that is where I firmly believe we will be there.
Yeah.
In a decade, absolutely. I think the implications are severe, but the implications are very good from a global economy perspective, from a value creation perspective, from an access to information, insight, knowledge. Where nowadays, if you have a lot of money, you can have the best education. You can have the best lawyers if you need lawyers. I don't know why you would need lawyers, but if you need them,
AI. That's one profession I think AI should get rid of. Yeah,
best healthcare providers. Where in the truth, this will actually make that significantly more available. Ironically, I think self-driving cars, the future is very different from what people thought it would be. If you look at the Star Treks, or the Star Wars, or any of these futuristic movies, people have space travel and they have robots doing all the work, and people are doing the thinking.
Yeah.
Actually, ironically, robotic technology is significantly advances significantly slower than what AI advances. So robotics will still be probably expensive. People will probably still be driving cars, especially in South Africa. But in much of the world, a lot of still have plumbers and electricians, and people will still do farming, etc. I think, but a lot of the thinking assistance will be done on an automated basis. That's what the generative, AI revolution is going to enable. Is a lot of the information processing and insight is going to be able to be augmented in a materially profound way.
There are no doubt youngsters watching this discussion and being inspired by what you've said, and probably maybe even deciding that they want to take up a career in this field. What would you say to them? So let's say someone in high school now is thinking AI might be a career choice for them. What should they be studying, and do they have to be very good at mathematics?
Okay, that's a great question. I would actually say that probably programming is as important or more important than mathematics in terms of using generative AI. So I would have always told people, look, I think engineering, actuarial is the fields of the future. And today we probably employ in the bank more chemical engineers than electronic engineers because chemical engineers don't want to work on plants. They're very smart. They're smart enough to figure it out that they don't want to work on the plant.
They'd rather work in a cushy office.
I always ask them, why did you study that? Or industrial engineers? So I do think, though, that this technology will revolutionize every service industry. Every service industry. So while I'm saying, for example, I think plumbing, electricians, maybe that will not be as changed as much. But actually, anybody that's studying at university, if you're in high school, I think becoming better computer literate, being able to program. The reason why it's important is it allows you to think procedurally, which is in this case as important. You are probably not going to build the statistical models, large language models. You are not going to build the vector search that is going to find the optimal embedded answer. Okay, I'm talking a bit jargon here.
Sure.
But you don't have to do that because we've got teams of people that are going to build that. But if you want to be a lawyer, you have to understand that the traditional job of a paralegal, where you're reading through hundreds of cases to find the case that looks like this case, that will be automated. So, but of course, you will then have to apply higher level thinking to synthesize that and to understand how you would want to position it, etc. So, I think becoming technologically literate and embracing the technology is going to be critical. It doesn't matter what service industry you are working on. But yes, it may have a bigger impact in certain industries. I think if you are pursuing it in the field of technology itself, there is still huge scope. So our number one shortage is still for data engineers, not for statistical people, but data engineers. People can program, move data around, do the data quality checks, make sure ML ops. So running, let's say, a machine learning operation that is adapting itself based on information it gets, that it can adjust to the latest modus operandi of fraud, etc. Those areas, those are super high demand jobs. Obviously, if people are interested in this field, as opposed to thinking that you want to become, let's say, a pure mathematician, etc. But of course, having an understanding of mathematics is a good thing. So I would certainly say you certainly want to be more than maths literate. But you don't have to pursue just a field mathematics. And actually, what we're applying, and this is more statistics than mathematics. That's why actuarial science is probably more statistics than mathematics. Engineering, I always love, because engineering you learn design skills, which you do not learn if you do, let's say, a BSc or even actuarial science. You can understand and analyze problems. You don't necessarily learn the design skills. You can't build a control system. You were never taught to analyze a system and design a computer or something that works in a network environment or a control system. Or do signal processing, etc. So I'm punting a bit of engineering there, but yes, those are. I mean, that's some ideas from my side.
Sure.
But it is like we are not employing just from one discipline. Maybe that comes out.
It's a multidisciplinary area.
This is still, if we find smart people, we will hire smart people in any discipline.
Is there anything the universities in South Africa should be doing differently, in your view, given your experience in that field, to get graduates ready for this field?
So look, I once had the privilege of presenting to the NSFAS board, but okay, that was quite a while ago. I think things have really changed. That was when it was still a loan scheme, and now it's actually open market. Okay. I do think in South Africa we are not smart at how we allocate resources in education. Okay, and that sounds like a profound statement, but it's probably true. We are not really making sure that we are not necessarily funding the programs that will create jobs that people will be able to add value to the economy. I think that is something that I think politically that is probably a step away from where we are.
Okay.
I do think that the STEM programs are at least generating they're in by and large generating the kind of quality output that we want. There is some fine tuning. For example, I mentioned data engineering, computer engineering. There is some of that. We seem to be I just see by what we hire, we generate an excess of certain engineers that clearly, but that we can employ in the bank. But we don't necessarily give people career guidance to the point as are you actually going to work in that field? Then I think we are completely underplaying all the technical and artisanal and other work. If you can talk to ESCOM, I mean, getting people to weld boilers, right? Build machines, etc. That's where we have got a major short. We are very far behind. In Germany, they have got those fields are not seen as inferior, and even like I mentioned, a plumbing electrician. Those are high demand, highly paid jobs. Why do people think that I shouldn't become that? Right? I think we should. This is gonna be actually, if people thought that being intellectual was going to be the high-paying jobs, this is this brings some competition into that, where I think people have to be either more practical and do something. I'm not saying with their hands, but understand what will not be impacted, and or if you're doing an intellectual job, understand that you're going to have to use technology to do your job better.
Plenty to think about. We could actually continue this conversation for hours, but we are thoroughly out of time. Dr. Christoph Nieuwoudt is Chief Data and Analytics Officer at First Rand Group. It's been a brilliant discussion. Thanks for sharing your insights with our audience. Thank you.
Duncan, thanks for having me.
Pleasure.